And we're live. Go ahead, John.
Hi, welcome to On the Dot. Today we're lucky enough to have a special guest with us, Braden Pollock. Braden's a true innovator, and he's well-versed in the domain space. You can see him frequently as a panelist or a domain moderator at some of the many industry conferences that we have and events, and he's also been on many shows like Domain Sherpa. So he's somebody that's very well-known, very busy, and we're lucky to have him. One show I particularly remember is he was on the Sherpa talking about how he was able to acquire some names and then sell them for more than double what he paid, which I thought was a pretty interesting show.
Well, I think it was a lot more than that.
Well, I know the minimum requirement to be on that show was you had to sell it for more than double. So I thought it was pretty cool. We also had the opportunity to talk to him about some of the different businesses that he's been a part of over the last couple of years, and I think it's a really good thing to have somebody who's not only a domain investor but also a business owner or involved in businesses boards and other aspects, so he can also communicate about how he buys names as an end user or for his businesses, which I think is a really good benefit as well. So we're lucky to have him here with us. He's a very busy guy, and with that I want to turn it over to Braden for any comments, and then we're going to jump into some questions.
You said double. Funny thing is what's unusual about the domain space is, I get offers all the time for double or triple, and in the domain world we don't take that. I don't think I've ever sold anything for only double. I had one that I sold the day after I bought it, and it was about 2.25x. And I only sold it for that little because it was literally the day after I bought it. But it's funny in the rest of the investing world, to get 100% ROI is fantastic, right? And with us, you get an offer for 2 or 3 times what we paid a month later, and you say no.
Yeah,
I think it's funny that Domain Sherpa show. I think that was about 15x in about a year and a half.
Very good.
And I've done better, but that was just when Mike asked me. That was one of the good sales at the moment. So.
I thought it was cool because you went into a little bit about how you bought the portfolio of names and how you were able to hold on to it and sell a good one. So that was a good thing, and it made me think about when we're trying to acquire names, who would be a good guest, and that's one of the things that stuck out for me. That and your business acquisitions and some of the knowledge that you have. So I want to start this at a real high level and just ask, when I'm thinking about buying a name that somebody else already owns, what key things should I keep in mind when I'm going to go approach somebody?
I think it's helpful to determine whether or not this is was someone who recently purchased it or was the original registrant. Oftentimes when you get an original registrant, with the exception of the folks in our circle, the original registrant is somebody that had a business a while ago, may not have the business now. And so they may not know the value at all. So you don't necessarily want to educate them of the value, but you want to find out what they think it's worth and if they're willing to let it go. Mm-hmm. If it's a domain investor, it's going to have an entirely different value to them, right? So they need to make a profit on their acquisition. And if they bought it a year ago at market value, they want to make a multiple. If you're calling, Frank Schilling, he's going to want the highest price, or any well-known investor, which happens often. I got names all the time, and it's one of my friends that owns it, and I know it's going to be a big number. So if I'm acquiring for a client, I'll let them know, it's a buddy of mine or it's a major investor. It's not going to be cheap. But then again, if you know the investors, you kind of know their pricing. Some guys just want to turn them quick, and some guys hold on to them for the long term. So if you know who you're buying from, you have a better idea what they're gonna ask.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the key things that is helpful for someone who's trying to buy a name is to figure out what their budget even is before they go into it. Maybe it's not a name they can afford, like you said. If it's an investor who's holding for a long time and wants to get the most, it's good to start out with, hey, what am I willing to pay for this, and what's it going to do for my business? Mm-hmm. I think that's something a lot of people don't understand. And another key thing, I think, which is just second nature for us since we're in the business, is it's going to take a little bit of time to get that name. And a lot of times marketing companies or other people will come to us and say, hey, we're about to launch tomorrow, or we just launched this yesterday and we need the name and we need it today. And they don't understand that the negotiation process takes a while, getting in touch with somebody if you even can.
Yeah.
And then even the transfer process, if it's at another company, it could take 7 days. So I think lead time is important, people to think early on.
I've tried to get a name from Comcast for a couple of years. I can't get a hold of it anyway. They don't care. And I've made 6-figure offers and nothing because it doesn't move the needle for them. And who's going to make the decision?
Right.
There's another name that I went after. It was actually 3letter.com, and this is way before the big boom. But it was a name of a company that was acquired by another company. And so I contacted that new company that was no longer using it. They were redirecting it, but that's it. And the acquisition was already several years old. And I offered them, I think, $50,000 because they kept saying no. And so I had to come up with a high enough number for them to take it to the powers that be. I think it was $50,000 they offered it. And they eventually decided they'd let it go, but they figured that my offer was too low. And at the time, it was actually very high. It was probably worth 20. And so they put it on auction, and it sold for 35 in auction.
Nice.
Oh.
So, they didn't do well by making that decision, but they also didn't know the value, and they just assumed that my offer was low. But that process took probably a year.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. It was one of my later questions that I had, but I think, we can go into it now.
Yeah.
When you're looking at buying a name, you already brought up, if it's an investor, you pretty much know you can get a price from them. It just depends on what that price is. And if it's a big company, you might never get to the right decision maker. So I think there's a different approach depending on if it's somebody who maybe had it for their personal small business for a while versus somebody who's an investor versus somebody who's a big company like Comcast or, Google or some giant company. You really have to try and plan differently for your approach. And I think, you've already alluded to that. If you're not savvy and you say, oh, well, Coke has this and they're not using it, just for them to even get in touch with you over the name is a big obstacle.
Yeah. I got an email from a guy. I can't remember the domain. I don't remember. He said, he wanted it for a cheap price, and I made some 6-figure quote. I gave him a 6-figure quote, and he came back and he says, this thing has been parked for years, and you're not getting anything for it, and this is. And he ended up calling me names. He was one of those guys.
Yeah.
I should probably look him up so that I can out him right now, because he was a jerk. But the thing is that, he said it's been parked for years. You're not doing anything with it. And he thought he was clever because he did some research, but he didn't do enough research because I actually bought that name at a public auction, and he would have seen that it had transferred just a few months prior. And if he would have seen that information, then he would have realized that I'm a domain investor, that I want to make a markup, and he could have seen what I paid for it.
Yeah.
So he thought he had information, but he didn't. He really didn't have enough information, and so he could have either abandoned altogether, right, by seeing what I paid for it, and if he wasn't willing to pay that plus, then he shouldn't have contacted me, or at least he should have had that information so that he could go into it knowledgeable and negotiate with me, but he didn't, and he was a jerk, and so the conversation didn't go anywhere. I blew him off, and even if he would have come back with a decent number, I wouldn't have worked with him because he was a jerk. So he screwed himself.
Yeah, I agree. I think, we're going to get into a little bit, some of the negotiating techniques, but I don't ever think that being a jerk to somebody is going to work out in your favor. So I don't understand why so many people try that method.
Especially when you have what they want.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's start a little bit, higher again. And let's say I'm a regular customer and I have no idea. I see this name, I know it's taken, it might have a website on it, or I just see that I can't buy it on, when I go to the registrar to GoDaddy and type it in, it says, no, sorry, taken. I'm going to go to a place called the Who Is, which is like a public directory that shows you who the owners are. and that usually has contact information of the person who owns the name, and it'll give you some other information like when the name was updated, how long it's renewed out for, things like that that are pretty key information. You can find those at a lot of places, but I was wondering if there's one specific one you like to use, or a combination of some that'll really give you some information on who do you reach out to contact about the name.
Well, so what tool do I use?
Yeah, for the Whois check, or maybe if you use something else, like sometimes I use archive.org. If there's any tools you use to try and figure out who owns this name, how can I get in touch with them?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly used archive.org plenty of times, but I typically just use domain tools.
Right.
That has all the information. I mean, there's plenty of services. They're all good. I mean, some offer more than others. Some have a subscription requirement. It depends how often you use it and what information you want, whether or not it's worth paying. So most of the time, if you're just looking up who it is, you don't need any information beyond their contact. So you don't need a subscription.
That's true.
It just depends on what you're doing.
I like the domain tools because you can get as deep as you want. You can see if people change the hosting around the lie. You can see what the former Whois information was, which is important. If somebody has privacy on the Whois, which is like having an unlisted number in the phone book, where they put a proxy information on the Whois so that it doesn't have their real name and address on there, sometimes that makes it a little bit more difficult to find out who they are. But I think there's a couple key things to keep in mind. A lot of the privacy services, you can email that email address that's on the Whois with the private information, and it will forward over to the owner of the name. So they should still get your email anyway for making an inquiry. And the other thing about domain tools is it'll have archived history of the Whois if you pay for it. And that'll give you maybe some information on the person before they put the privacy on, which you can try and reach out to them and see if they're still the current owner. So I think those things are things people don't know about generally. They think, oh, this name has privacy. I can't get in touch with that person. There's no way to find them.
Right. And a couple of tricks that I utilize is I take a look at the name servers, take a look at the parking company. So I'll reach out to the registrar. Since I know a lot of people in the space, I can reach out to the registrar directly and say, forward this email. I can reach out to the parking company and say, forward my email. So I can kind of easily get around the privacy that way. But of course, not everybody can do that. If you don't, if it's a Chinese registrar, I'm not going to know anybody, right? And so unless you have the relationships, it's not going to work. I would just suggest doing what you said and emailing that email address. But if they're hiding, they're not going to get back to you. I once bought a trademark name from a domain investor.
Uh-huh.
It was under privacy, and he was one of those guys, and he buys other people's marks. And I was doing this on behalf of a client, and suing him wouldn't have gone anywhere because it was overseas. And so I just sent him an email, and I think I offered him $10,000 for the name. But I figured out who he was.
Mm-hmm.
He would respond to, hey, do you want to sell this name? And of course he wants to sell it. Once I figured out who it was, then I just emailed him. I called him out by his name, and I said, look, my client's willing to pay $10,000, not a penny more. If you're willing to take it, put it in escrow. And an hour later, I got an email from escrow.com. And so we were able to get the name. And my client was thrilled because it wasn't the $10,000 didn't matter to him. It was that he couldn't get a hold. He'd been trying to get a hold of this guy, and he couldn't. So
Yeah.
I found the workaround by talking to some friends, and and once I identified who he was, I recognized how he was motivated. It's just you got to come up with a high enough number. And so I just sent him a number that I thought he would take, and he did.
So I imagine that happens quite a bit, like when you try and reach out, or people try to reach out and it falls on like deaf ears, so to speak. What are some like techniques you use to get their attention? So you mentioned, putting out a high number. Do you usually put a number in your initial email to them, or, and also I guess follow up to that, how long do you wait before figuring they're not going to get back to your email as well, and you try something?
So on an initial email, I don't put out a number.
Okay.
I try not to ever put out a number. I try to get them to give me a number first. But if it's somebody that just won't respond after a couple of tries, and I'll wait a few days and I'll email them again. And then I'll try going through other channels, like the registrar, the host, or the parking company. And then beyond that, then I will step up my game and make an offer, right? And I put that in the subject line, of course, because you wanted to see it.
Yep. So that's the attention grab, basically.
And the thing is that if it's somebody that's not responding to you at all, and let's assume it's not a monster name, right? It's just it's a kind of an average name. It's worth a few $1,000, or it's a trademark name. Because a lot of the really big names, I mean, I've got plenty of six-figure names, and I get tons and tons of offers every day. And it's okay. Well, somebody's offering me $10 for this name I want $500,000 for. You know, how many of those do we get? Like, there's a ton of lowballs, and they're a waste of time. So if you've got somebody that just doesn't respond to those, that's why you have to put out a number. And then you have to come up with something that is at least serious enough to get their attention, right? So if I've got a name that's a six-figure name, but I get a $10,000 offer, obviously I'm not going to sell it. I paid more than $10,000 for the name. But $10,000 is at least a substantial enough number that the person is really interested. They're not offering me $10. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they're kind of serious about
they
it.
recognize that it has some value. They're not saying, well, you know, what do you pay? $10 a year?
Yeah.
Right, I'll pay you $10. So they know that domains have value. I sold a name for I'm just trying to think of some of the opening offers. Oh, the Sherpa show that I did. I sold the name. It was statement.com. I sold for $140,000. And I paid $9,200, I think. The opening offer was $5,000, which obviously I'm not going to sell it for $5,000, but at least they were making an offer that, you know, it made me feel like they recognize that it has some value. And I replied with, this is going to be a six-figure name, and they said, okay, well, where in the six figures?
Yeah.
Right? You know, is it 900,000 or is it 100,000? So my responses are always kind of a brief templated response that this is a six-figure name or this is a five-figure name, because 99% of the time I don't hear from them again. And that's an easy way to kind of weed it out. And if they respond with more questions, then I'll continue the conversation.
That makes sense. Do you always resort to email first, or if email's not working, do you try any other channels such as like the phone number and the Whois or social media or anything like that?
If I'm buying?
Yep.
Yeah. If I'm buying, I'll call the number for sure. And when I receive a phone call, I feel like they're more serious as well.
Yeah.
So for sure, I'll call the number, and I look them up on LinkedIn. I look them up on Facebook and see if I can find them.
Awesome. What else you got, Joe?
Next question.
Yeah, the next question is, what's the hardest domain name that you've ever had to acquire? Can you take us through that?
The hardest domain name. I'm trying to think of an example. I know you sent me the questions beforehand, but I didn't read them.
No problem.
At least I admit it. God, there's been so many that I've chased after for a long time, and you know, I'll have a list that every 6 months I'll go back to it and ping them again. So there's names that have taken years to acquire. You know, the bigger companies are super tough. Mm-hmm. Because you have to find the decision maker. You get a hold of the communications guy or the marketing guy, and you know, they don't have the authority, right? Because they're not in the business of selling off their assets. And not only is there no decision maker, it has to go to the president or the CEO that's going to pull the trigger. Nobody wants to do that. And also, it doesn't move the needle, right? So if you've got a multi-billion-dollar company, it doesn't matter what the name is. They don't care. It'll help to have, I'll have an attorney. I'll send a letter on attorney letterhead. I'll have an attorney reach out. That gets their attention a little bit more, and then hopefully it gets kicked upstairs. That they've actually received a piece of mail with a real offer on it. It's from a law firm, and so they kind of take it more seriously. So that's helped. But just getting through to the right person has been difficult, very difficult. I've resorted to at one point I was working on a name for months and months, and they just wouldn't sell it, and they weren't using it. And there was this woman who, she was not the decision maker, but she was the person that could get the decision. She was definitely the person to make it happen. She just had to get approval from the president. And I started sending her flowers. And I sent her flowers every day because I couldn't get her to respond to me. But I knew who it was. And so I sent her a bouquet. And on the third day, she called me.
That's awesome.
And the first thing was, you have to stop sending these flowers. She's like, everyone in the office is talking. And I said, well, that was the objective. I was trying to get your attention. She gets a bouquet of flowers at her office. What is she going to do? She's going to accept it? Who the hell are they from? Oh, it's some guy that's been trying to get a hold of me. She only ignored me for so long until they just keep coming.
That's a fun thing.
That was, it worked. It worked. And I said, all right, I'll stop sending you flowers. However, I'm glad I got you on the phone because I want this name and this is what I'm willing to pay for. And she said, all right, let me see if I can get it done. And I bought the name for, I think, $5,000. It wasn't an expensive name, but she needed me to be done bothering her.
Right. That's awesome.
So I think that was the hardest because it took a long, long time. And I was really trying to brainstorm, trying to come up with a way to get her attention, to get her to respond to me. That's what it was. And she was, and I had considered getting on a plane and flying out there, and I thought, I'll try this first. And then I'm in LA. I think she was in Virginia or something. And I thought, I'll try this first, then I'll fly out there. I needed the name.
Yeah, I think that's a cool story. I really think that sometimes you have to go to extremes and try and figure it out. We tried to get a name for somebody it was about a year. And we wound up talking to his wife on the phone a couple times. We sent her stuff. She got him on the phone with us finally. It's like, stop calling my wife. But we got to talk to him. They wouldn't sell us a name. It was a big company, and they're not using the name. They haven't used the name in 10 or 12 years, and they're just never going to sell it. And it was a big media company that wanted to buy the name, and they launched on a .net because we were able to get them the .net, but we couldn't get them the .com. And it was all in the news how they launched on the .net, and why didn't they go after the .com? Little did anybody know, we've been trying really hard for a year to try and get the .com for them, and we just couldn't. And they had to launch. So I mean, it's just tough. I think
they got free publicity from not using the .com.
Yeah, it worked out good for them. I think one of the things that people don't understand about big companies, like you said, is it just doesn't move the needle for them. And it's even if you get to the decision maker, if you can get in front of the CFO who might want to put some extra money on the books, it's not a big enough number for them. Yeah. And one of the things that we come across is they may have advertising contracts with other companies or other legal obligations besides a contract that maybe they were doing some ad campaign 4 years ago, and nobody wants to go back and look over the contracts to see what it's going to do. And what the term was or any of that stuff. They don't even want to be bothered, so they just keep paying for the name. And for them, it's $10 a year, and they don't care. They're just not going to sell it.
Yeah, my experience has been that no one can make the decision.
Right.
Even when the number is enough. It was like this issue with the $50,000 offer for that 3letter.com that he just said, I don't know who can make this decision. The president doesn't. He said, I asked the president. He doesn't want to make the decision either. I said, but you're not using it. He says, we don't need it. We're definitely not using it, but no one can. And that's what I've experienced calling companies. So they don't know who to talk to, and they're too far from the president's office, and the president doesn't care, and there's just no one to make the call, even though they admit they don't need it. That's been the hardest for me. Yeah, it's not a matter of price.
Yeah, those are tough.
Yeah.
One name I've been trying to get for a company for 3 or 4 years, and a guy owns it overseas, and he likes the name, and he said he wouldn't sell it. And I asked him why. I just keep bugging him every 6 months or so. I check in with him, and I don't want to give up my email. I got in touch with the company who wants to buy it. They said, we'll let him keep his email forever. Like, we'll give him a contract that says he keep it. So I get back to him. He's like, yeah, I still don't want to get rid of it. So it's just tough sometimes, no matter what you do. So
yeah. There's a name right now. It's similar. The guy doesn't care, and it's a oneword.com, really super brandable name. I offered him $100,000. He says, even then, I don't know. I said, look, the name's worth like 25 or 30 grand. I'll pay you the 100, but let's do this. Because it's been so long. And he's like, maybe. I guess you could build it out and work out a deal. And the guy doesn't want to do it, and this is the decision maker. He's the owner of the company. But for him, I guess he's got plenty of money, and the $100,000 doesn't matter.
Yeah, I told I forget where it was. We were in a meeting, and I think it was at the domain conference, and somebody was talking to me about a negotiation, one of the most fun ones. And for me, it was fun because I was negotiating for. We have a really big buyer who's pretty much got unlimited funds, and I was calling up another guy, and I look him up. I started to research him, which is one of the things I'm going to do if it's a big name. I try and figure out who owns this name, who are they, is it a big company, is it a big person, and the guy's like a New York Times bestseller on sales and negotiation tactics, and he's got a ton of money. I Google his house, and it's a compound, worth. I forget how much money it is, tens of millions of dollars for his compound. And I'm like, okay, this guy is not going to care about the money. And the other guy doesn't care about spending the money, but I want to get him a good deal. And just trying to get in touch with that guy to get him on the phone was tough, but I finally did, and we were able to negotiate a price back and forth. And the other guy, who's worth billions, is a great negotiator as well. And so I'm in between with these two negotiators trying to work out this deal. And it worked out good. We got the name. And actually, the guy sent me an autographed copy of his book. He was so happy with how the negotiation went. But that was fun, and it was tough because neither one of them, like the other guy didn't need money, he just wanted the name, and the other guy didn't need any money and just had the name. And was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to sell it. That doesn't make any difference to me. So that went on for a while, but we eventually worked something out.
You're a billionaire client. I've got a few thousand names I'd like to show him.
I'll get you in touch with them.
Do you have any tricks to get people to get out of that mode of hey, I don't really care, or I don't need the money? How can you kind of push people over the edge to be okay, let's go ahead and let's just do this and pull the trigger and get rid of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. If they don't need the money, I ask them if they are involved in any nonprofits or any charities that they support, and oftentimes when you get wealthier people, they're involved in charities. And so if they say yes, then I tell you what, how about I make a contribution to your charity? Perhaps the whole thing. If it's not about the money for them, then the money goes straight to the charity. And then they feel like it's not them selling the money, selling the name and bringing in money. It's now they're doing something for the charity.
That's good. That's a good thought. I like that.
Yeah, that's really good. I never thought about that before, but that's a great point.
Yeah.
Write that down.
I will. All right. Before we open it up for questions from the audience, I have one last question, and it's on negotiation tactics. So what things have you found work well, or is there anything that people should really watch out for? I mean, you already alluded to if somebody's being a jerk, that's not going to work out good. But is there other things people should watch out for, or anything that you find? I think the subject line is really good to get people's attention. The flowers, that was great. If there's anything that you use on a regular basis that would help people.
I think I've gone over everything I use on a regular basis, although one thing I would add, a tip would be, he or she who names the first number loses.
Mm-hmm.
You need to try very hard not to put out an offer. So while I've mentioned I put out offers, that was the last resort, right? But you certainly don't want to, because you don't know what their expectations are. And once you put out a number, then you set those expectations. And if you set them too low, that's not necessarily going to help you. And you just don't know what they have in mind. There's a name that I bought. This name a few years ago. This is I don't want to mention the name, but it was the kind of a category killer. The industry is this word, and the WHOIS information was bad, email address was bad, the phone number was bad, and I'm certainly not the first person that went after this name, right? And the only reason why it was with the original registrant was because no one could get a hold of her. And I was determined to get this name. And so I just started doing like a skip trace, looking for this guy. And I found him. And he was in a totally new industry because it had been years. The company he had sold years prior, but he held on to this name. But I found the guy, I called him up and I said, hey, do you own this domain name? And he said, oh yeah, sure. Yeah. That's been years. He had like a 10-year registration on it.
Yeah.
I said, I'd like to buy it. And he said, well, I'd be open to talking about it. No one had gotten hold of him, or else it would have been sold. And so my plan was, I was going to open at, depending on his number, my first offer was going to be $35,000. I was going to go up to $75,000 on the call. And then, but, end the conversation at the $75,000, and I would go higher than that, but, following up with emails and other calls. So that was my strategy going into it. And I said, well, how much do you want for it? And he asked me, well, you tell me, what's it worth to you? And I said, well, I did a little dance. I said, really, it's up to you. It's your domain, and I don't know, you're not using it anymore. So it's really, the value is whatever you feel. And he said, how about, would you be willing to do this today? I said, well, yeah, if we could strike a deal, sure. He says, how about 35? And I'm thinking, awesome. He said 3,500.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
So of course I responded with, I don't know. And he said, what were you thinking? And I said, I was thinking more like, I guess I could do $2,000. And he said, if we do it right now, I'll do 2,500. I said, right now, like as when we stay on the phone? And he said, yeah, I'm going to send you an email and you agree to it. And he thought he was robbing me.
Yeah.
He kept me on the phone. He sent me an email saying that I agreed to pay him $2,500 for this domain. And we did that deal at $2,500.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I got a $50,000 offer on it a few months later. I didn't sell it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's developed. I use the name. So you never know. So don't throw out a number right away, depending on what it is. But sometimes, there was a name I bought not too long ago that the guy had a price on it. It was too high, and I just so that was his first price, and I sent out an email, and it was something like, $3,000. Final offer, take or leave it. You accept it. Let's put it in escrow, and he took it. And there was no correspondence. That was it. So, yeah, you don't know, but try to get a number from the other side first. If it's listed with a number, that's something, and you can counter. Otherwise, if it's a cold call, get them to start the negotiation. That's my tip.
That's good
that
tip.
makes sense.
Awesome. So you want to open up for questions then?
Yeah.
All right, cool. If anybody has any questions, feel free to post them to the page, and we'll...
Wait, there's other people here?
They're watching. Actually, so one that did come in, Marshall wants to know, how many people do you talk to that have unrealistic expectations, and how do you knock them down to reality and then still get a deal going from there?
When I'm buying, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Yeah, that's tough. I'll send comps. If I called somebody once that had a name that was arguably worth about $25,000, and he said he wanted $2 million, and it was just it was a legal name, and it was just nuts. The guy was out of his mind. Original registrant, and it's because he's gotten a lot of calls, right? People asking for that name, and so he's like, I want $2 million. And I said, look, you're never going to get $2 million. Here's a very similar name, like the plural or something, and it sold for X, and here's another one that sold for Y, and so I showed him the comps, and I mean he still didn't. It didn't change his mind, and eventually he put it on auction some years later, and I think it sold for about 35, which was actually less than it was worth at that time, because it was many years later. The only way that I can think of to set expectations is send him the comps just to show him what they're actually selling for, and then just make your offer, and then leave him be, and you can always go back to him.
Fair enough. Let me refresh to see if we got anything else coming in on the Google Plus page.
If not, and if this seems complicated for people, there's services you can use to try and have somebody help, which I think, we didn't bring up, but it's a good point. If you want to use somebody else, that's a great negotiating tactic as well for a couple of reasons. One, it can keep you private. So when you're going out to make an offer, they don't know who you are. They're not going to research you and find out that you live in a giant compound and you have a lot of money to spend. They're going to, not know exactly who is calling them and who wants to buy the name. I think that's a tactic that could really work. And plus, you have a buffer in between you and the person who you're buying the name from, which can help to present things to them. And also, if you have a professional, Braden brought up a lot of tips. He's been doing this for a long time. We have the domain buy service. We do it on a regular basis. We have agents that's all they do all day long. They know how to find people. They know how to negotiate. They know contacts at other companies if they're behind privacy. So it's always helpful to reach out and use a service if it's even something that's going to save you time to be able to pay somebody else to do that for you. So you can use our domain buy service, Braden, if you want to. I'm not sure if you want to give people out your information or not, if they want to use you, or if there's anyone else you recommend. I think that's a helpful tip for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. That's not a thing that I would do, is negotiate. I mean, I would do acquisitions. I do acquisitions for large companies, but just negotiating the deal. I mean, I'd give some free advice, I suppose, but that's about it.
That sounds good to me.
So it looks like we have one more question. Braden, they want to know, how often do you go after GTLDs? Do you specifically try to avoid them? Do you concentrate on them? Do they interest you? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a good question, and certainly very topical and timely. I do have GTLDs. I've got some big names, and I've got a portfolio of .lawyer and .attorney. I try to keep it at about 10% of my overall portfolio, which makes it some hundreds of names. It's a gamble. It's certainly speculative, and I think more speculative now than .com, because the market isn't there yet, right? We don't have mass adoption, and so until we have mass adoption, we don't know what's going to happen. With the .lawyer, .attorney, .law, I think these are strong for me. I've got a legal marketing company, so it's easy for us to just upsell our existing clients. I've also got a database of all the lawyers in the country, so we do these email campaigns, and sell them. But what I like to do is figure out what names the registries did not hold back, right? So instead of kind of randomly looking around and typing in names to see what comes back, what I do is I ask the registries for their append list. So what names have they appended onto, let's say, .attorney? And then you take a look at the list, and it's kind of the obvious practice areas and cities and states, and then you figure out, well, what words are good words for this industry that they missed, that they didn't hold back. So once you can identify that, then you can go back to them. And this is at the early stages, right? When the Gs are first launched. Determine categorically what they missed, and then register those. And the reason why I say what they missed is because we've got these big registries, Uniregistry and Donuts, Minds and Machines, and these guys have registered a bunch of names in various industries that they don't really know anything about, right? And so dentist. If you know about dentists and the dental practice, the dental industry, you can figure out dental terms or vet terms, or name the industry photography. They're not photography experts. They're not dental experts. They're figuring out some of the terms that are worthwhile to hold back, but they're not going to get all of them, right? And I think that's where the opportunity is for investors. When we see there's a launch, let's figure out what they're not getting and grab those early on. Don't wait for the end users to come. They've already picked them up, right? The vet who knows his industry and he's looking for, I don't know, emergency.vet or Los Angeles emergency.vet. The end user will pick that up. But if as investors we can identify those industries and the terms that they missed, we can grab them before the end users do, and then we can market them to the end users more broadly than one name at a time. I think that's where the value is. Because if you can register 50 of them with that term that they missed, and you can sell 10 or 20% of them, you're going to make all your money back plus, right? Because we're going to pick them up for $25 or $30 and then sell them for $500 or $1,000. So you don't have to sell that many to make all our money back and make a profit. And then if we don't sell the other 75%, that's okay, because we made enough on the first 25% that we sold.
That makes sense.
That's
that kind of leads me to another question I have for you then. What do you prefer personally? Do you prefer selling quick domains like at a smaller number, like selling a few for a few thousand, or do you prefer ones that take a while but you sell it for like 6 figures?
In general, I'm a 6-figure kind of seller. As far as the G's, there's not a lot of those. I picked up some very strong, I think it was divorce.lawyer and employment.lawyer and civil rights, which we developed, and at some point I may sell. Those are 6-figure names, but all the others certainly aren't. So as far as the G's, it's tough to pick up a 6-figure name without spending a lot of money, because those have already been identified by the registries as valuable names, and so you've got a lot more risk there. Even though you think you can sell it for $100,000, it's going to be 5 years from now probably, and you're going to have to pay them $50,000 for it. Well, hopefully, and the fact is that $50,000 today is what they hope to get for it, right? Because that market isn't there yet. Now, there's a lot of opportunity there. Don't get me wrong. I'm not negative on the G's at all. It's going to take some time. So we're going to buy a bunch of names, and either we're going to win big or we're going to lose big. It's going to be one of the two. But some guys have picked them up and then quickly flipped them to other investors. Is that right or wrong? I don't know. I'm not a guy that sells to other investors. I wait because if I buy it for X and another investor thinks it's worth Y, I'm going to wait and sell it to the end user for Z. But I think that it comes down to what you can afford to do. If you can afford to buy and hold, which is what I do, then do that, right? If you're a quick flip, some people do both. Elliot Silver, he buys some and he puts them in the bucket of buy and hold, and then most of his names is a quick flip, and that's worked great for him. That's his strategy, and all he does is buy and sell names. Fantastic. Hi, Elliot. That's a shout out to him. And so I think it just depends. I know guys that buy names, they hand reg names for $10 and then sell them for $50, and which is a great ROI. But you have to turn a lot of names to make any money.
Yeah.
But if you just by yourself and you have no staff and no infrastructure, and it's just your laptop at home in your apartment, and you can turn a lot of those names. Okay, turn a lot of those names, make $100 at a pop, and you move a few of those a day, and you're good. You pay your rent. It just depends on what your business model is, and I think everybody needs to determine what that model is and stick to it. I think a lot of domain investors is it's like kind of a shotgun approach. You buy all these different names that you think might have value in industries that you don't know anything about. And you don't necessarily buy to hold. You don't necessarily buy a quick flip. It's just kind of a random mess. And I really think that you need to begin with the end in mind. There's an expression that if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. And I think that's very true in the domain space, because people don't really set out a path. They just kind of buy names that look good. And you're going to get hurt if you do that. Every domain investor at the very beginning always loses money, right? Because they buy a whole bunch of names. They buy up a few hundred names. They think it's great. And then next year they drop them because they realize they registered a whole bunch of crappy names. We see that time and time again. And the advice I always give to somebody that wants to get into this industry is, I say, don't register any names. Don't buy anything, because you don't yet know what you're doing. Read the blogs, read the auctions, and see what things are selling for. When I first started, I went to live auctions and I literally wrote down the sale price next to every name. And then I read the blogs and I studied it first, so I could figure out what the values were. And then I just bought legal names because I could get a handle on that, because I had a place to sell them. And I figured out where the values were, so I knew what to buy them for, and I knew what to sell them for. Because otherwise, if you just see a name that you like, you just buy it. Are you buying it right? Now there's certainly sophisticated investors out there. Not I've got names in multiple verticals, and I try to figure out what the right values are. But there's the Mike Birkins and Mike Mann and Frank Schilling and these guys that have these huge portfolios. They're buying across lots of verticals, but they have a better understanding of values. But if you're just getting started, don't randomly buy names, because you're going to get hurt. You're buying them from other investors probably, or a hand registering name that nobody else wants. That's why it's available. And so don't think that you're outsmarting these guys that have been in it for years, right? Study first and watch the trends, right? There's this, the Chinese market is on fire right now. And if you were watching, reading the blogs and watching the sales, you can see this upward curve. I started buying the 3letter.coms a few years ago, and really got into it kind of the end of last year, because I saw it really taking off. Now, look, there's people that were buying them. I know guys that bought them for $1,500 years ago, and they were way ahead of the curve. Now they're doing fantastic. But if you could see what's happening in the market, follow the trends, see where the values are, then you can buy right. I think that was a super long answer too. I don't even know what the question was.
That was great advice, though.
I got on my soapbox and I just kept on going.
That's awesome. I think that's all we have for questions. Joe, do you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think it's really great that you were able to join us. I know you're really busy, and a lot of the advice you gave is really great stuff for people that are either just starting out on the G's or what to invest in, all the way up to sophisticated guys who try and negotiate for a living. I think that sending flowers thing is something I'm going to remember, because that's great advice.
Yeah, that. And
the funny thing is I had forgotten all about that. That was years ago, and I just remembered that when you asked me about difficult acquisitions.
So now you're going to reuse it. So
I got to try. I've only done it once. I should do it again. Do my signature thing.
No,
that's awesome. Well, cool. Thank you so much for taking the time, Braden.
Hey, Joe, is that a straightrazors.com sticker on your?
Yes, it is. I try and support Luke.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm his partner in that.
I know. It's a great company. I like it a lot.
Yeah, and we've been doing fantastic as well. We've gotten into beard care, hence the. We're selling a ton of stuff. It's been really good. Those names were tough to get. Straightrazors.com, that came from. I doubt there's NDA. It came from Frank Schilling, and he didn't let it go easy, but we finally talked him out of it. It took a while. But sometimes when we're going after a name and it's owned by somebody that wants a lot of money, you just got to keep pounding away.
You do.
Anyway, well, thanks for the support with the sticker.
Yeah, I like to let people know. Like I said, I use it, and I think it's a good company. I know you guys do a good job with the customers too.
Thanks. I'm glad I was able to work in a plug.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. That's awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Braden. I appreciate it.